So let's get into the message for today. We began our Advent series last Sunday by considering the fact that from the very first moment of our need, that is mankind's need, God's first instinct was to promise hope, to offer grace. He led with grace, and he promised that one day he would make things new. And hope is what we need. For many, they need Christmas more this year than maybe any other time. And they desperately want and need for hope to be real, and it is. Today I want us to go to the book of Isaiah, chapter 59. Last week we spoke of hope, and I'll be honest with you, this whole series is about hope because Christmas is about hope. It is a season of hope. If you could sum it up, the whole Christmas story, you might sum it up like this. And remembering that it didn't begin in the manger, it began in the garden. It actually began in suffering, it began in rebellion, it began in pain as Adam and Eve rebelled against God and sinned against God. If you could sum it up like this, it would be hope created, hope lost, and hope restored. That's the Christmas story. That's kind of the whole story. But in this passage in Isaiah 59 and earlier, every week my wife Sarah asked me, hey, what are you preaching this week? I normally lead with this. I'm going to preach about Jesus. And she goes, I know, but specifically, what about Jesus are you going to preach? And I said, well, I'm going to preach from Isaiah 59. And I didn't say anything else. And she went and read Isaiah 59. And she was like, okay. I'm curious to see what this one's going to be. There's not a lot of hope in Isaiah 59. It's actually kind of dark. In this passage, it was written from a time where hope was in short supply. And the reason is that it was written from a time of such uncertainty and turmoil. There was no peace. And peace, in many ways, is what I want us to talk about today, the second week of Advent. That's another key word of Christmas. If hope is one, peace is another. The second candle of Advent represents peace. And Isaiah wrote this during a time where peace was not a word that anyone would use to describe how things were going. And for me, that sounds a little bit familiar. That kind of rings true in 2020. Would you consider 2020 to have been peaceful? We're nearing the end of what has been a very tumultuous year. And I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer this morning, but just because the calendar flips to 2021 does not mean everything's going to get better. I know some of y'all are clinging to that. It's just 2020. It's just a bad year. We're going to wake up on January 1, and COVID won't be a thing, and everyone will be happy about who we elected, and everything is going... No, it's just not going to happen. This doesn't mean that everything's going to magically get better. This year has shown us political unrest, social upheaval and protest, and even the thing that most of us can fall back on has been under attack. What do we say? Well, at least we have our health. But health itself, for some, has been lost. I read this week of somebody who they've lost 7 family members to COVID. And wherever you land on this, chances are if you're in the room this morning and you're wearing a mask, you're coming at this maybe from a different angle that some people have. But wherever you want to land on this, whether you think it's political or not, people are hurting, people are suffering, people are dying. And for many, they don't have peace this Christmas. The people to whom Isaiah prophesied longed for peace. They longed for things to just settle down, for there to be certainty, for there to be peace. And I think that sounds a lot like us. We've enjoyed relative peace for most of our lives. And this year, much of that has been disrupted. It's actually probably the shortest definition of what peace is. It is freedom from disturbance. We actually talk about that. It's actually right. You can actually be charged with that in certain places of misdemeanor for disturbing the peace. It's a freedom from disturbance. And many of the things and the people and the places even that are sources of calm and certainty and peace for us this year have been disrupted. They've been disturbed. So when Isaiah 59 was written, the children of Israel had been in exile in Babylon for 70 years. They've now come back to Jerusalem, and it's a mess. There are no city walls. There's no more temple. There's no central government. There's no enforceable set of laws. There's no obvious leadership. There's no justice. There is violence in the street. There is massive poverty. There is complete, fundamental, widespread social breakdown. It's a mess. It's the furthest thing from freedom from disturbance. So when you read Isaiah 59:1, the very first verse, you need to know that not only was all that going on, not only was there no peace, but the people had lost hope. Indeed, the Lord's arm is not too weak to save, and his ear is not too deaf to hear. Now you may go, that's a weird thing to start a chapter with, Carrie. The prophet here is answering an accusation that had been made against God by the people. And it wasn't so much like they all got together and said, you know what? You know who's to blame for this? God's to blame for this. He's not strong enough to save us. And even when we cry out, he doesn't hear us. There wasn't an organized protest around this. What had happened was within the hearts of the people, they began to believe that God was not strong enough, that God did not care, and that God did not hear. So the very first thing the prophet does is he answers that accusation. Indeed, the Lord's arm is not too weak to save. His ear is not too deaf to hear. It's very common when life does not go as planned, when our dreams don't come true, or when we suffer loss, when we're disappointed in some way, when life gets shaken up and disturbed, it's tempting to accuse God. This is what the Israelites had begun to do in their hearts and no doubt in their homes and around their tables. Where are you, God? Why don't you care? Can't you do something? Don't you even hear us? And the worst part of this is that they and us, when we begin to doubt the goodness and the mercy and the grace and the strength of God, we don't go to him anymore. We don't run to him with our cares and our concerns and our needs. When you doubt him, you don't go to him. Because you don't ask for help from someone you don't trust, do you? You don't ask for help from someone that you don't think can help or wants to help or would even want to listen to you. And instead of experiencing all that God is and can be for you, you miss out on that. The Israelites had stopped believing. And I'm going to say this, for many of us, to one extent or another, we may have stopped believing. Where's the hope? Where's the peace? God, can't you do something? God, why haven't you done something? God, don't you care? Don't you even hear? Are you aware? My wife Sarah grew up with Santa Claus being a big part of her Christmas tradition. Is that true for most of y'all? Raise your hand if like you grew up writing letters, believing in Santa. So she did. I didn't. And that's not because my family was a bunch of Grinches. We love Christmas. We celebrated Christmas. We gave gifts. But when I got older, I asked my mom, and I'm scanning the room to make sure we don't have any little ones in here because I don't want to be that guy. But I asked my mom, I was like, hey, Mom, how come, I don't remember ever believing in Santa Claus. And Mom said, well, we didn't teach you there's no such thing, but we also didn't, point to Santa. She goes, I'm just going to be honest with you. She said, we grew up, we didn't have much, and your dad and I we worked and we saved and we sacrificed to buy every one of those gifts, and we weren't having you opening them on Christmas morning thinking they came from somebody else. Some of y'all can identify with that. So not a Grinch, not anti, none of that. But if you ask Sarah today, she still believes. I actually sent her a text, and I knew what she was going to do, so I actually recorded the text conversation with her. And just to make sure that I could speak honestly on her behalf, I recorded it. So watch this little short video of this text message exchange with Sarah, and you'll see what I mean. Y'all roll that video. I can't type very well. Just cut this slide. So if you couldn't read it very well, I asked, do you still believe in Santa? And she said, of course. And I asked her why. And she said, you stop believing, you stop receiving. Now, some of you grew up in that same, kind of mindset. I knew she would say that. She said that ever since I've known her. You stop believing, you stop receiving. It's worth the risk, right, to go ahead and keep believing. It's not worth the risk to stop believing. When you stop believing, you stop receiving. Think about that. Now, I'm not trying to make some sort of a deep theological statement with that. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying about what it means to believe in God and to hope and to trust. I'm not guaranteeing that God will do this if you believe a certain way. What I am saying is this is what you need to know. When you begin to lose your hope, when you begin to doubt God, when your belief begins to slip, begins to fail, begins to fade, when you stop believing, when you stop running to Him as your deliverer, your redeemer, as your Father, as the one who can bring your peace, you will absolutely fail to receive all that He has for you. When you stop believing, you very much do stop receiving. Oftentimes, it's not only does God want to save us, to bring us healing, to bring us normalcy and peace. Not only do we want that, we want Him to do it on our terms, don't we? We want a quick exchange, a transaction. I believed, I did the right things, I prayed the right prayers in the right way. Now you have to do that. We don't just want Him to deliver, we want Him to deliver on our terms. But God just doesn't work that way. In the wisdom of God, He always makes us wait. Not just because He's cruel, not because He wants to sit back and go, I'm going to let them twirl out there. Last week I mentioned that The promise of Christmas, the promise of hope, was 4,000 years in the making. And that's such a short time to God, but we're like, 4,000 years? If we have to wait, 4 minutes, it feels like forever. And then when God does move, not only does he not move in our timing, rarely does he move in the way we want him to. I wanted you to do it this way at this time. And he does it at a different time and in a different way. Paul Tripp says the grace of God comes to us in uncomfortable forms. It just doesn't come the way we want it to, and it doesn't come when we want it to. But God knows what we need. God is not the source of the difficulty. For the Israelites, it was the effects of their own decisions, their sins. But not only that, they were still carrying and living through the effects of the sins and the decisions of their parents and their grandparents and their grandparents. In the verses that follow, Isaiah makes that case. He kind of sums it all up in verse 8 of chapter 59. He says, they have not known the path of peace, and there is no justice in their ways. They have made their roads crooked. No one who walks on them will know peace. They have done this. They haven't known the path of peace. Instead, they have made their own roads, and they have made them crooked. There's no justice, there's no righteousness, and no one who walks in that way, the way that they have decided, decisions they have made, they've made this bed. God is not the source of all of this. When we're in the midst of uncertainty and suffering and pain, when our peace is disrupted, it's tempting to point our finger at God. But the finger always points at me. And just like with the Israelites, God is not the source of our difficulty, but God absolutely wants to use our difficulty to show his grace, to call us to him. But when we stop believing and we stop running to him, we absolutely stop receiving all that he has for us. When we're in pain, he wants to heal. When we're lost, he wants to find us. When we have need, he wants to provide. When we're in the midst of chaos and anxiety, fear and uncertainty, he wants to wrap us in his arms and bring peace. And in a group this size, some of you sometime were tempted to question God, tempted to doubt his goodness, tempted to wonder if he hears you. But his arm is not too weak, and his ear is not too deaf. He has promised to bring rescue and healing and peace. And notice what he says in verse 20. The Redeemer will come to Zion, and to those in Jacob who turn from transgression. This is the Lord's declaration. The promise is repeated. We're still waiting. We're still waiting on that promise that you made in Genesis. And here he comes back and says, this is the declaration of the Lord, the Redeemer will come. The word Redeemer and redemption, it's a beautiful one. It means to buy back. When we stop trusting, when we stop believing, when we have sold ourselves, sold our souls to sin, Jesus is going to come and he is going to live the perfect life we couldn't and die the sacrificial death we couldn't to buy us back and present us to the Father when we couldn't. We were hopeless. We were bankrupt. We couldn't possibly buy our way out. We had nothing to buy with. And when that was true, he brought the riches of the kingdom to bear on our behalf. He would come and redeem us. And that begins when we stop pointing the finger and look in the mirror. When we come to a place where we admit that nobody else is the problem. Because the Redeemer was promised, the Redeemer would come. That Redeemer did come on Christmas, but the redemption comes to those who admit they're the problem. In verse 20, he says, the Redeemer will come, and then he says, for those who turn from transgression. To turn from transgression, you must first acknowledge that you are in transgression, that you have transgressed. You have broken the rule. You have violated the command. You have rebelled against God. You have stopped believing. You have started pointing. It begins when you realize that and you stop. When we stop blaming and we stop running. For some of us in here, we'll go, I'm not blaming God. I'm blaming him. I'm blaming her. Because I can run from a situation. I can run from a problem. I can run from a relationship. And some of you have done that. You have run from a relationship because it was a bad relationship. You're like, Carrie, it's not my fault. I was in a bad marriage. Marriages aren't bad. People are bad. The old rough mayor of Philadelphia one time when asked what he was going to do about street crime, he said, streets don't commit crime. People do. There aren't bad marriages, there are bad people. They happen to marry each other. I can run from a problem in a situation. I can run from a relationship. But when I get to the other side, there I am. The common denominator in all of my problems is me. And I can't outrun me. And for some of you, you've spent your whole life trying to outrun you, all the while pointing the finger and blaming and running and not believing. And that's what happens in the passage. Look at verse 12, 13. This happens among the people. They say this, for our transgressions have multiplied before you, and our sins testify against us. We're the problem. For our transgressions are with us. We're in it right now. We know our iniquities, transgression and deception against the Lord, turning away from following our God, speaking oppression and revolt, conceiving and uttering lying words from the heart. This is them going, it's me. I did it. I'm the problem. I'm the source of the disruption in my life. It's my decisions. It's my sins. You've probably heard the anecdote about G.K. Chesterton years ago when the Times of London approached multiple authors and said, what's the problem in the world? And he wrote back and said, dear sir, I am yours, G.K. Chesterton. I'm the problem. It's me. It's not God. It's not you. You're your own problem. When this becomes me, when this becomes you, when this becomes us, we are in the perfect position to experience the redemption, the mercy and the grace, to experience the peace our hearts so desperately long for. But the promise of peace is for those who believe. The peace has been promised. God absolutely delivered. He absolutely brought everything to bear on your behalf and on my behalf for us. We didn't deserve it. He had done nothing wrong. We had done everything wrong. But the only way we experience it is by believing. It's by stopping pointing the finger and enough of the running. Enough of pretending like we've got it together and we've got it all figured out. And instead, simply standing before the God of the universe and saying, there's a massive problem in this world and there's a massive problem in my life, and it's me. And that's the moment where the God of the universe says, I have exactly what you need. Now you're ready. Let me redeem you. Let me buy you back. Let me place you where you should be. Let me do a work in you. You've been trying to do it on your own. You've been stop running away and run to me. Because Christmas is absolutely about hope, and Christmas is absolutely about peace. But it's never found out there. It's never found within. It is found in him. It's for those who believe. Pray with me. God, thank you for bringing peace to the earth. But God, it doesn't come in the way we think or in the timing we think. God, there's not this magical change that happens and everything around us just begins to work out perfectly. God, you bring peace to the hearts of men and women in the midst of the chaos. But God, that peace is only available to those who will believe. So God, this morning on your behalf, I invite everyone watching, everyone worshiping here in the room, everyone from wherever they may be, God, that today might be the day that they start believing. That today might be the day that you restart that in their hearts. Even those who have walked with you, everything that's happened over the last several months, this year, maybe they've been in a longer season. They've kind of lost hope. They've stopped believing. They've started to, maybe in small ways, doubt your goodness and your mercy and your grace, doubt that you care and that you hear, that today you would call them back. And God, it may very well be, it likely is, that there is someone who is going to watch this message, somebody who is in the room, somebody who is hearing me, that for the very first time needs to acknowledge their need of you. Declare their belief. Stop running from you and run to you. And today you welcome them in open arms. Thank you for loving us. I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.